Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Outside of popular cultural depictions of Buddhism, most Americans have little knowledge of Buddhism. Well, one of our students and my guest today, Hannah Seiler, decided to do a deep dive into Buddhist life, ethics, and worship. Hannah lived in a South Korean Buddhist monastery for a summer and has a lot of experiences to share with us. Welcome, Hannah, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so how and why did you take the notion to spend part of your summer in a Buddhist monastery?
It was half academic, half spiritual reasons. The reason I got into learning about Buddhism and things like that was through the religious studies department here at App State. Mm-hmm. I like to study specifically religions endemic to East Asia, and I was taking a class last semester with the professor, Dr. Mai, and he sent out an email to the class basically that had a couple summer programs. This one caught my eye specifically because of the immersion of it, because when studying religions, and especially religions endemic to East Asia, it's important to take into account the overlap of culture and religion. So I believe that the most effective way to study that religion would be to immerse myself in the culture and the lifestyle, because there's only so much you can learn about Buddhism from a lecture hall in rural Appalachia.
Right.
And so I applied, and he wrote my recommendation letter, and then I got in.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you are a religious studies minor and a history major, so this is right down your alley. So I guess you can't immerse yourself much more than living in a monastery.
Yep.
So can you describe, say, a typical day for you in that monastery?
Yeah, our days were really busy, and I think that was the point, is you're not supposed to have much time to think or ponder on your own, which is, a little contradictory to what some people might think, because it's a very community-based practice. It's not individualistic at all. Mm-hmm. At 4:30 in the morning, they would wake us all up with the beat of the wooden fish. They'd walk around the dorms, and they'd go like doot doot doot, and then we'd all get up. We all had to fold our beds and get in our uniforms, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning, we had to be outside doing our morning exercises. And one of the pictures depicts that. We have to be outside doing our morning exercises. We do those for about an hour, and then at 6 o'clock we stop, and the people assigned to doing kitchen and food duty go to the kitchen, get the food. At 6:30 in the morning we eat, and then we eat for a half hour. Before we ate, we have to do our mealtime chants, and then we eat. We do our procession out of the dining hall, and then at 7:30.
We're just up to 7:30 in the morning. Is this what you just
Yeah.
You've already? It reminds me of that commercial. U.S. Marine does more before 9 o'clock than most people do in a day. You've already done that. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just amazed by how much you got going on here. So we're at the 7:30.
We're at the 7:30 mark, and then we do our academic classes, because the program, it was heavily academic, which I enjoyed. That's a big reason I entered the program, was because it gave academic and religious and cultural and community experiences kind of all in one. Yeah. And so we essentially did, how many hours? 4 hours of academic class, and we got a 15-minute break in between each hour, and it was just one professor lecturing, and we would take our notes. And then at 11 or 11:30, we had our lunch, which we ate in the same manner. We did a mealtime chant, and then we ate ritualistically, and then we left, and then we would have...
What's it like to eat ritualistically?
This is specific to Chinese Buddhism, actually, because as I discussed with you earlier, this was the first time the program was held outside of China or Taiwan. So a lot of the things we did with the program itself was traditionally Chinese Buddhist, but then the cultural workshops and the temple experience we had were Korean Joge Buddhist.
Right.
So we had 4 bowls, and we would go in a lined up order that we had already had, and then we would kind of unfold into the tables. We would sit down, and then you unstack the bowls from largest to smallest, and then we go do the mealtime chants. And as we're chanting, the people come around with the food, and we're not supposed to talk. We're not supposed to look each other in the eyes or anything. So they have this complicated system of physical cues you can use to say when you want more, when you want less. So they come around with the food, you do like this, or you cross your chopsticks a certain way to like let them know what you want and what you don't want. And then you take the bowls in and then you eat them. And if you want more of a certain food, we have 4 bowls. One was for the assortment of vegetables, one was for rice, one was for whatever soup we had, and then one was for dessert, which would be a piece of fruit most of the time. And then if you wanted, like, say, more rice, you would put your rice bowl at the edge, and because it was a certain size, the servers would know, and they would come around with it. And they would kind of just keep going around until the half hour was up. And then, and here's something that a lot of people find interesting, is they have a very strict no food waste policy, and they take this extremely seriously. So they serve you up boiling water in the smallest dish, and then you pour it from the smallest dish to the largest dish, and you swish it around, and then you drink the boiling water.
Oh my goodness.
To make sure that none of that food is left in the bowl.
That is quite ritualistic. I recognize, I mean, you're all vegetarians, so that's part of Buddhist respect for life, and then this ritual at the end to remind you, I guess, that not to waste resources, not to waste food.
And before we ate, I forgot about this part, they would read out the 5 mealtime contemplations, we're basically, if you do it right, the point is you're supposed to be meditating with everything you do. So we're supposed to be like meditating as we eat and contemplating these 5 contemplations, like, as you eat.
Yeah. So it's very regimented, okay?
Very
regimented, and I guess the monk's life is like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a time during the day that was, I guess, worship? Would you call it worship in Buddhism? A time set aside for something? I mean, it sounds like worship is part of every activity, if you include it. But is there a time for a formal worship period during the typical day?
Yeah, right before our bedtime, and our bedtime was technically 9, but then at 8 we got an hour of free time, which was used for like showering and personal maintenance, cleaning the dorm. Right before then we had an hour of what's called Vespers, which is where you go in and you do 3 prostrations to greet the Buddha. The person at the front lights the incense in a ritualistic way as an offering to the Buddha. They're beating drums. It's very ritualistic. And then we chant a couple sutras. The main one being that we chant the Heart Sutra, and the Heart Sutra is very, very important to most Mahayana Buddhism, but especially like Chan Buddhism, or also called Zen Buddhism. People know it more as that here in the States, and Pure Land Buddhism and stuff. So that one's very important. And then we would chant that one, and then we would do a set of prostrations as we chanted like the refuge, and then we would do more prostrations before we left. And then we would sit and meditate for like 15 minutes after, and then they would release us.
Yeah. Can you paraphrase the Heart Sutra for me?
The Heart Sutra is really short, and that's why it's so important. It's because it's known as like the heart of Buddhism. And it basically is the way Professor Dr. Mai puts it, not to bring him up, is every word in it is meant to undo the word before it. Because the point is that language is empty, form is empty, you have nothing that's not made out of something else. And it is kind of difficult to sit here and just like paraphrase it, because there's so much like Buddhist philosophy that goes into it. But essentially the point is like there's a lot of no's. There's this part where it's like no form, no eyes, no body, no voice. And it's basically saying once you are awakened to the fact that everything is nothing essentially, and words have no meaning, and everything has no meaning, then you are awakened pretty much. And then it declares itself as the ultimate sutra, which a lot of sutras do.
Okay, so you're slaying the ego kind of with all those no's. And,
yeah.
You mentioned that there are various forms of Buddhism. So the temple that you were in, or the monastery, is part of the Mahayana tradition?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the largest form of Buddhism in Southeast Asia, is that right?
There's Theravada, and then there's Mahayana, and Theravada can be seen as like, it's also known as like Hinayana, which is like the little vehicle, and Mahayana is the big vehicle, and Mahayana is like an expansion of Buddhism. So Mahayana is where you're going to find the idea of like bodhisattvas and multiple Buddhas, whereas Theravada is very like traditional, basic Buddhism that you'd find more in like India. And then Mahayana is that East Asian Buddhism where you find a lot of the more like ritualistic things. It expands the goal, the path, the pantheon, the practice. It's,
So when I was in China, I had the opportunity to go to a Buddhist shrine, and it was very much a sensory experience. It was people lighting incense, chanting prayers, the beautiful statues, and people bringing offerings to the Buddha. Can you describe the temple or the monastery that you were in? Is it like that? A lot of activity like that going on? Is it a beautiful space, a sense of sacred space? How would you describe the temple?
Yeah, it was beautiful. Something I found interesting is after we left the temple, we kind of went on a small tour of Korea, and we entered some other temples, and they're really similar architect-wise in Korea. But then after I went to Japan, and I went to a bunch of Buddhist temples, and those are way different from Korean temples, but then they're all kind of similar to each other within Japan. So I'm guessing the ones I were in were very different from the ones you were in China, but it was also a very sensual experience. There was Buddhas lining the wall and huge golden Buddha statues and, the scent of incense. They used to burn a lot more incense apparently, but they had to stop because the air quality got so bad. So now they kind of cut it back on the incense.
Within the temple, inside.
But it still smells a lot like incense. And then there's chanting going on at any given moment. Like monks are always kind of chanting. There will be like the beating of instruments like drums to accompany that chanting. There are offerings, there are big watermelons and baskets of fruit. And then people from the public or people in the monastery will be there like doing prostrations or meditating or doing their own form of worship there.
Do the monks maintain the temple? Is that are they the ones who take care of all the offerings and cleaning up and so forth? Is that?
As far as I'm aware, it's either monks or lay people who go and volunteer at the temple.
You sent me some pictures and some photographs that you took while you were there, and I called out 4 or 5 of them that I thought we could look at and you could talk about just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a photo of the temple, one of them anyway. So this is a beautiful photograph. I think I saw you in there somewhere. Is this your group?
Yep, I am right next to the monk in the center.
Yeah, okay, right. So these are the monks and the students who are participating in this program. And tell me about the group and maybe the structure behind you there.
So there's only one visible monk in this picture, and it's the guy in the gray in the center. The rest of us are students. We're in different colored uniforms because it was very gender segregated. So all the women were in orange and the men were in brown.
Okay.
The group was incredibly diverse, and that's another whole aspect why I loved the program is that we had people from 26 different countries. So it was an experience to talk to other people and learn other people's cultures, and we would exchange gifts. The thing we're in front of is actually what is considered by a lot of people the holiest spot in all of South Korea because it is a shrine to the bones of Sakyamuni Buddha, and his bones are said to be buried in a mound right behind that little shrine there. And this was the culmination of a pilgrimage we made up to the very top of Odasan Mountain. We walked upstairs for 2 hours, but the energy was beautiful. If you turned the camera around from this angle, you would just see this huge mountain range. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. But before taking that picture, we went up there and we did the pilgrimage around the shrine, which is we marched around it 3 times. And then if you chose to, I chose to do it, you went and prostrated to the bones that are behind the temple, and you did 3 prostrations. There is chanting going on in there 24/7. And we asked the monk there if he had ever been on shift, and he said yes, they're 8-hour shifts. So the monks stand there for 8 hours and they chant the Heart Sutra for 8 hours, and it never stops because this is such a holy, important place. You go in there and there is no depiction of the Buddha, which kind of calls back to the M-iconism, and instead it is an empty cushion as if he is seated there because his bones are right there. It's very low. The door is very low, so you are forced to bow and prostrate yourself when you get in. And then you do the 3 prostrations on the inside, which I did, and a lot of the other students there chose to do it. But yeah, that's what's behind us, so pretty big deal.
So it's the top of a mountain, and it's a sacred mountain.
Sacred mountain.
The sacred spaces are pretty important in Buddhism. Maybe you can say a little bit about that, but I think but this is not part of the monastery complex that you were at. It's a separate place?
Yeah, this is separate. It was, my bad for forgetting this, but there's Woljungsa, and then there's its sister monastery, which is a 3-hour walk or 30-minute bus ride from Woljungsa, and then That's like at the base of it. And then if you climb up the mountain for 2 hours, then you find this shrine.
And every pilgrimage is supposed to be difficult, so it sounds like this was a kind of a tough climb to this shrine. Yeah.
And on the way back down, I was talking to the monk in the center. His name is Wollam Sunim, and he told me that we were probably the first like group of foreigners to make the pilgrimage like that, which that was a big deal to me. It felt like I was, making history in my own little way. And I know it was a big deal to Korea as well, because the press came in and filmed us and aired it on a couple things. There was like a news article written about us. And
wow, that's interesting. Well, let's see what else we have here in photographs. This must be the exercise that you did at 6 in the morning or something.
This is our morning exercise.
Yeah. So are you in this photograph? I didn't see you in this one.
I'm in like, they lined us up according to height, and I was one of the taller girls. I'm in like the very back of the second row. I think like fourth from the back. So I am there. But yeah, we had our live. This was probably taken around like 5:45, because we would get out there, like it was still kind of dark when we got out there, and then we would do it like as the sun rose.
So is it like calisthenics, or is it more like Tai Chi from China?
It was like Tai Chi. I forget what it was, because we weren't exactly doing Tai Chi, but it was like stuff with like your pressure points and stuff, and it was like low effort exercise, but you would still bust into a sweat, because they would have you doing like planks and like squats and stuff like that.
And it's supposed to be meditative in a sense, or is this just physical exertion?
Yeah, it was supposed to be meditative in a sense, but also to like get you up and exert you physically.
Okay.
So it was,
I see there's a kettlebell on the picnic table, so somebody must have been lifting some heavy weight there.
That is actually a wooden fish.
Oh, it is? Okay.
That's
all right.
the instrument that they would
use. That's the gong.
They would use it to wake us up, and they would also use it to like mobilize us. It's an instrument that's like important in a lot of Buddhist monasteries, because a lot of times it's important that monks don't really talk. They try to move in silence, especially during like silent retreats, which we did for a week, and that's used to mobilize people and get people to go where they need to go without using verbal cues.
Very interesting. What's the water? Is that ritualistic?
Yeah, it kind of. We weren't supposed to touch it because it's dirty, but basically it was there because in the old days, people would come from a long way, and then they would have to like cleanse and purify themselves. And that's another thing I find, where you find a lot of crossover between things that are practical and things that are ritualistic. So it was kind of a mix between like doing ritual purity and also like the practicality of having to clean yourself, especially, back then came along.
I know there are a lot of water rituals in global religion, so I wondered if it might be connected to some sort of ritual. Well, let's see what else we have, what the next photograph is. This is really one of the favorite ones that you sent me, because it's so pretty. The architecture and the mountains in the background. So this is part of the temple complex that you were at, or is this part of the shrine, or is this somewhere else entirely?
This is in between the temple on the ground and the shrine that we pilgrimaged up to. So about halfway up to the shrine, there was this like temple building, pretty much like a small temple complex that is supposed to like guard the shrine. And so this was kind of like the halfway point to that. The architecture is very like similar, almost identical to the architecture at our temple and most of the other temples in Korea I saw, and that's what I meant by like having very similar architecture. But it's one of my favorite pictures too, because of the way it just kind of hangs off the side of the mountain. I kept getting scared that people were going to like fall down it. But inside there are 3 big statues of the Buddha, and we go in there and do the prostration to greet the Buddha, and then proceed up to his bones.
It's really beautiful. Okay, so what else do we have here? That's a courtyard, I guess. Is this in the same place?
Yeah, this is the temple that we stayed at. So this is what you're seeing right there is like, I think that is like an administrative building, but then that building kind of off to the side, that's one of the dorms.
Okay.
And so this is pretty much where we lived, and this is like, if you kind of right off where that center place was that we were all standing for the morning exercise. So this is pretty much the courtyard of where we lived. And it was raining. In this picture, it rained a lot because it was monsoon season on a mountain.
Yeah.
But
okay. I think there might be one more photograph. Yeah. So I found this one very interesting, and my guess is that this would be some sort of procession to a shrine and
Yes.
some sort of pilgrimage. But I'll let you tell me about it. So.
This was the culmination of everything we did. So this was on like our final day at the temple. They woke us up even earlier than they usually do. They had the wooden fish beating at 3:30.
Oh my goodness.
And so we were out there by 4 o'clock in the morning. It was dark, and then we processed out of the temple, kind of like to the bottom, and then we did the 3 steps, 1 prostration pilgrimage all the way back up to the temple. So that's where you take 3 steps, and we're all chanting the whole time as you do it. I forget the verbiage of the chant, but at the time I remembered it because it was so repetitive, and it was like 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, and then you get down and you do that full prostration. And we did that for about an hour before we got up there, and then we did the prostration around the pagoda that was there. It was, my knees hurt really bad after it. There was a picture that I included that's like me covered in dirt, and that was the aftermath of that. So that was our, the culmination of everything we did. But that ritual, the 3-step 1 prostration thing, is important to a lot of Buddhist traditions because the number 3 is very important.
Is there something, it was a difficult month. I mean, you were eating sparsely. You told me your accommodations were kind of Spartan, and you were doing a lot of physical activity. And is there some connection between experiencing difficulty and heightened awareness or spirituality? Is there a connection there with the meditative experience?
Yeah, it's supposed to just be, it's the whole concept is the middle way. Like it's not like asceticism where you're supposed to like not eat at all and like sleep on the bare ground and in the cold. Like we had a mat for the ground. It's just we weren't supposed to expect comfort, and the food, it was good. They fed you as much as you wanted. I found it very filling, but it was all vegetables, no meat, it was, the point is you're not supposed to live in excess. You're supposed to have what you need to survive so that you're not focused on or attached to comfort or flavor or, sleeping in. You're supposed to have what you need, but not too much, and, take that middle way. Because people don't call themselves Buddhists. I don't know, it's different now that like, Western influence is a big thing, but traditionally, people wouldn't be like, yes, I'm a Buddhist. They would say, I'm following the middle path. Like, I follow the middle way.
I see.
So that's,
what that is. Do you think that's the most important teaching within Buddhism, this idea of the middle way?
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't say the most, one of the most important maybe, or is that kind of what you took from it?
Yeah, it's about like letting go of your attachment to material things.
Right.
Because attachment is like the root of suffering, and once you let go of that attachment, it enables you to like see the truth and become enlightened. Do
you think that's an important message for Westerners to hear? I mean, we in the United States anyway, and I'm overgeneralizing, but we're pretty attached to stuff, right?
Yeah.
We live a pretty consumerist, oftentimes materialistic life compared to the rest of the world. So is that something that Buddhism can speak to us in our culture?
Yeah, I think that's an important message for everybody to hear, really. But if you're going to ask what I think needs to be taken away from Buddhism and given to Westerners, it's the idea of abandoning individualism. And I think that was really difficult for a lot of people there. And that's also one of the things I liked most about it, is you didn't do anything by yourself. It was entirely community-based. I lived in this community of 60 people, and we only saw each other pretty much for a month. We did everything together. You couldn't really exist without each other, but because of that, you as an individual were still important. You kind of had to abandon the sense of like, oh, well, this is what I want to do. I can do this myself. Because in Buddhism, having a teacher, having a master, having a community, having somebody that you listen to is really important. And in Western Buddhism, in this secularized version of Buddhism, you hear a lot like, oh, you can do it yourself. Go off and meditate by yourself. Like, you can heal yourself by yourself. It's self-care. You need to look inward. And you do need to look inward to an extent, but that's really only the half of it. And if you take the community out of Buddhism, you're essentially taking out one of the three jewels, which is the Sangha. And I found that people there had a lot of difficulty with that because they were like, why are they making us do this? Like blank is ridiculous. I don't want to listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about, referring to like our program leader. Did I have my own issues with her? Yes, but I also understood that part of the program and part of what I saw as like the immersion is just listening and doing what they told you to do, because that's part of it. You're supposed to move as a community, and that's, you know.
So that sounds like a pretty powerful insight for you.
Yeah.
So did this program change you in any significant way?
Yeah, I think it made me kinder, and this is me speaking from like a non-academic standpoint. When you have to live in a community of 60 people for a month and you have to do everything together, it makes it literally impossible to not see every side of that person. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in today's society, not just in the West, but literally everywhere, you know, you go to work with a coworker and you don't like the way that they like sweep or whatever, and you're like, that's really annoying, and then that's the only impression you have of them, because then you leave work and go home. But when you work together, you eat together, you sleep together, you do literally everything together, it's impossible to not see the good side of these people that would otherwise annoy you and the annoying side of these people that you'd otherwise really like. And it happened that's an issue I personally have, is making like judgments about people because they did one annoying thing, and then I'll be like, you're annoying. Multiple times, especially throughout the beginning of the program, people would do something to annoy me, and then I'd write them off and be like, okay, well, I hate this person and I don't want to talk to them or be around them. And then days or like a week later, they would just do something really nice or do something really human, and I'd be like, wow, that's really kind. And then I'd be like, wow, that was ugly of me to have made that judgment. So you know,
having that experience of 1 month then gave you a different way of kind of relating to people that you were able to bring back and incorporate into your own life here. That's very powerful. And I do find that a lot of students who have these kind of educational experiences find them to be transformative in many ways. So I'm happy to hear you say that it was not only educational for you, but also personally fulfilling.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. I makes me want to do something similar, but I appreciate you sharing your experiences with us, and I'm really happy that you were able to take part in this and then come in and share with us today. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in class on Thursday.
Yeah. I'll see you in class on Thursday.
All right. Well, that's it for Religion and Life for this week. I hope you'll join us again on App TV next week. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.